Malcolm Brogdon could potentially be a game changer for the New York Knicks. Ben Strober of Locked On Wizards joins to tell us why.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are locked on to the New York Knicks. My name is Gavin, Schall. I am a native New Yorker. I am a credentialed media member that's been covering the New York Knicks for nearly a decade and the Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. This is, of course, Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving the most detailed insight on your favorite team 5 days a week. So be sure to join thousands of other fans in subscribing to both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. All right, guys, as promised on today's show, I'm going to be joined by Ben Strober of the Locked On Wizards podcast to do a deep dive on Malcolm Brogdon and talk about why he's still an elite driver, still an elite creator, why he was down from three-point range last year, how much of that was Brogdon, how much of that was his team context, and then we will get into his defense and why that is a weak point and what he brings to the table from a leadership perspective. And then for the third segment, I thought it would be fun to include my appearance on Locked On NBA Daily, where we did a full final segment, kind of a deep dive review of the Knicks offseason, just sort of like a broad strokes overview of what happened with the Knicks offseason. I give them a grade. I meant to do that as a whole episode, but now we get it all done in a segment. So we'll get into all that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, as promised, I am lucky enough to be joined by Ben Strober, the new co-host of the Locked On Wizards podcast. Ben, we've been talking about it a little bit off air, but man, how and I promise this is not sarcastic because there have been some terrible Knicks seasons that I was still incredibly excited about. So how excited are you for this upcoming Wizards season and just have basketball back in our lives again?
I'm actually very excited for it because I feel like there's something different I can look for every single night. And that's kind of what I've tried to explain to the audience here. I said you can't really look at it from the lens of wins and losses every single night, the stat sheet. You want to see how guys are developing. You want to see meaningful development from all of your players. So you're looking at it from that lens every night. Do you see Alex Sarr develop here in his second year? How good does Trey Johnson look in his rookie season? I've been preaching to the choir by whole summer really that I think he could be a sleeper candidate for Rookie of the Year. So if he gets enough playing time in his rookie year to do so, and that actually ends up happening, it'd be awesome. But there's going to be something exciting to see every single night for Wizards basketball, and should be a fun year around the NBA. I'm looking forward to my first year covering it officially here with the Locked On Podcast Network.
It's going to be a blast. I'm a little bit jealous. Obviously, like covering a really good team is a joy in its own right. But man, expectations. I was just talking to someone about this. Yeah. And I was upset after the Knicks beat the Pistons last year because I didn't feel like they played well enough in the series. And I was like, man, like Kevin Knox era Knicks fan watching me, I don't know if that's a real sentence, would have been just out of his mind happy with that. And there's just things you appreciate. There's unintentional comedy, and just tracking player development is an incredibly fun journey. But today, we're not going to talk about the young Wizards, as interesting as they are. We're going to talk about an old Wizard, a Dumbledore, if you will. Malcolm Brogdon, just 24 games on the Wizards last year, did not shoot the ball very well, did some other stuff well. We'll get into it. But how would you sum up the experience of having Malcolm Brogdon on your basketball team?
So, man, it was a roller coaster of emotions, to say the least, because the night that he arrives in D.C., he's obviously part of a trade that happened on draft night in 2024 that was shocking to me and the majority of Wizards fans when Denny Avdia, a guy that was drafted 4 years previously and was taken by the previous regime, so it wasn't shocking to see that maybe that the new regime that was put in here with Will Dawkins and Michael Winger wasn't going to fit the timeline here. But still, nonetheless, very surprising that Denny Avdia was moved on draft night. You got the first-round pick, which became Bub Carrington, a 2029 first-round pick as well, so that was exciting. And then Brogdon was a piece that came along as part of the deal, so you really think, hey, okay, I really like this deal here because we got two first. We obviously just picked up a guy who's going to be maybe the point guard of the future here in D.C. We'll see how Bub Carrington works out in the long run. But when Brogdon was included in that, I was kind of like, man, this is a guy I feel like we are going to be able to flip for some assets at the deadline. And ultimately, injuries has kept him off the court for the most part, wasn't really able to establish himself here in DC the way most of us anticipated he would. So the fact that he makes his way to free agency and he kind of was on the market for quite some time wasn't really that surprising to me. I guess his injury history is what makes it a little more difficult for him to showcase himself to some of these teams. And that's why I wasn't really surprised at all. And I'm not mistaken, it's not a guaranteed contract for Brogdon, correct? He's going to have to fight it out with Landry Shamet, right?
Yeah.
So
pending a trade, which seems like it should happen, but as of now, no, not guaranteed he makes the roster.
Got you. So, I mean, that seems like the right move for New York. So, first glance, I like the move for you guys because, I mean, this is the time right now for the Knicks. And I know from an outside perspective, it's probably funny to say because you probably hear it all the time saying, if the Knicks are going to win it this year, they're never going to win it. And it's kind of how it seems right now. And I feel like Brogdon is a guy, if you can keep him healthy, can really be a nice piece for you guys off the bench. But ultimately, roller coaster of emotions here in DC. Not the best time, I guess you could say, for Brogdon here, but it just didn't work out in the long run.
All right, let's get into some of the specifics of his game. The defining quality, I would say, of his offensive game throughout his career has been his ability to get to the rim and his ability to finish at the rim. And I was curious what it would look like in DC without a lot of spacing, to put it bluntly, around him. Like would the efficiency fall off? Would the volume fall off? And yet he, in terms of volume getting to the rim, and volume and efficiency once he got there, he was fantastic in both those areas. 38% of his shot volume came at the rim. There's 93rd percentile for combo guards, according to Cleaning the Glass. Shot 65% at the rim, which was above average and actually a career high for him. 94th percentile on shooting fouls drawn. I'm just curious if that was something where the tape matched the numbers and you noticed he was really effective around the basket, and if he still kind of impressed you from an athletic standpoint in his age 32 season.
Yeah, he did in the limited time that you got to see him because this team really didn't have a whole lot of options for a guy that could get downhill and break down the defense and finish at the rim. And I know that's really the biggest issue right now that ultimately the team's likely starting point guard on opening night this year, Bub Carrington, has. He's a guy that maybe seems better fit as an off-ball two guard. Brogdon was kind of the only real point guard, I'd say, that was on the team last year that could go out there and get to the rim. I know you had Jordan Poole, who is a very high-usage player as well, would often end up taking a long three-pointer on a ton of possessions. So it was kind of weird to see those two on the floor together because at times you'd just be like, all right, if Jordan Poole's got the ball this possession, he's probably going to isolate here and take a long three at some point. But Brogdon, when he was out there, I was kind of excited in a way because I felt like he had the best opportunity to help guys around him develop. I think it struck me as a guy that made guys around him better, and that was really the case for him throughout most of his career. And as he mentioned, he did a really nice job of getting to the rim and finishing for this team last year. I think ultimately where he kind of really fell off, obviously, was shooting the basketball from the outside because career really solid three-point shooter, and last year just a career low for the guy, and I'm not sure if the injuries were a part of that. Wasn't able really to get his shot, get his stroke back throughout most of the season, but I think it's tough. You got to look at the situation he was playing in DC. You're one of the few veterans on a super young team. Obviously, you're not going to win a lot of games. You're not expected to be out there to help them win a bunch of games. You're kind of out there facilitating for the most part and playing within the role that they had for him with the hopes that they'd be able to move him at the deadline. So I feel like when he did have the opportunities, he showcased himself decently, but ultimately the injuries were just really the reason why he was unable to make a name for himself and maybe get dealt off to a contending team at the deadline.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about his shooting, because I was curious about that. 29% from three, worst mark of his career. I noticed even relative to 23-24 when he was on the Blazers, not exactly a team that's like going to spoon feed you great shots. His catch and shoot opportunities went down in half from 3 to just 1.5 per game. I'm sure some of it, to your point, was rhythm. Some of it was small sample size. Was he taking like high degree of difficulty just because the Wizards couldn't like spoon feed him the type of looks, let's say, he got, I don't know, when he was on the Celtics and winning 6th man of the year, or was it as simple as like a stretch of really cold shooting for him?
I feel like it was a stretch of cold shooting, and not to say that there wasn't a lot of great looks for him, or he had a lot of guys that were able to generate looks for him on the outside, because the Wizards don't really have a lot of playmakers on the team, and that's kind of been the case for the past couple years. But I just got the sense he didn't look too comfortable in the looks that he was getting, whether he was actually getting some catch and shoot opportunities or taking them off the dribble, coming off a screen, or whatever it may have been for Malcolm Brogdon in the limited amount of three-point action that he did have last year. One thing to put in perspective: this Wizards team shoots a ton of three-pointers. They had 3 guys last year that hit over 100 threes. Most of them from that rookie class as well, including Alex Sarr, which was really surprising. Like, why is Alex Sarr making over 100 threes? It's because he's shooting a ton of them. The Wizards were not afraid to stretch the floor, play 5 out from that realm and shoot threes. So that's kind of why maybe Brogdon, the offense didn't really flow the right way that you could see it. But in a situation in New York where you wouldn't have to expect his usage to be that high, I think he might pick back up where he left off in some previous years in his career of shooting from the outside.
All right, guys, we'll be back with Ben in just a sec to continue talking Malcolm Brogdon. We're going to address just how concerning the defense is, how viable it is to play him next to Jalen Brunson, given those concerns about his defense and what he could bring to the table from a leadership and character perspective. We get into all that next here on Locked On Knicks. But first, I want to tell you about our good friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, well, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Guys, it is incredibly anxiety provoking, at least for me, to deal with my finances, to take steps to maybe put myself in the right direction. Having them all in one place, especially like if you're living with a partner, it'll help you get all your accounts organized in one area. It takes some of the strain off. It takes some of the mental work off. It just makes it all so much clearer. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. It's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Yeah, that's great context, and I agree with you. I do think, especially if he gets time with Jalen Brunson, almost certainly if he is in the rotation, we'll get a lot of run with Jordan Clarkson, guys who can collapse the defense, spray it out, and even secondary ball handlers like Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, just a lot more guys with gravity than what the Wizards have, at least at this point. You hinted at this before. I wanted a little bit more detail. For the 5th time in the last 6 years, he was at least 84th percentile in assist rate, right? As much as the driving and the shooting are key parts of his offensive game, this is kind of the final piece of the trifecta that, given the context of his role, I'm going to say, has made him an elite offensive player throughout his career. I'm curious how those assists came about. Was it mostly him playing off of Jordan Poole, to your point, and like getting the ball and attacking the closeout and making the next pass? Or even though he didn't really play a lot of point guard, I think only 16% of his possessions, he was a quote unquote point guard, according to Cleaning the Glass. Were there times where the Wizards would let him be a primary initiator, let him run a pick and roll, and was he creating shots that way?
Not often. I never even really had that metric that only 16% of the possessions he was actually playing at the point guard, but that makes a lot of sense just, thinking back to when I was watching the games last year, how they typically would operate. One area of the game where he was actually pretty good last year, I'd say, was actually moving in transition. And for a guy at his age, you maybe wouldn't expect him to go out there and run, but that was a Wizards team last year where running was really the best thing for him. They had a young squad, so if they could get out there in transition, that was the best way they were going to score. And he did a pretty good job overall, making plays for some of the other guys. You had Alex Sarr, who would always try to run in transition. It seemed the rebounding numbers would be so low for Sarr because he almost thought like a guard. From a sense, every time the ball would go up, he would start streaking down the floor because he wanted somebody to outlet him. down the floor. So Brogdon actually did a pretty good job at distributing the basketball that way. And at times when he was attempting to get to the rim, get downhill, he also could dish off to some of the guys that were down low. At the time, he had Bagley at a point last season, Sarr, who was down there trying to establish himself as a 5 for this team. So ultimately, that was probably the majority of the way you'd see him play make for him. And I could see him doing something similar in New York next year if the role does look that way for him.
Was he someone who was like pretty good at just consistently like having his head up and trying to hit those outlets? Because that's certainly an area that I think the Knicks would love to inject more pace. And last season, it was very contingent on basically 2 guys, Josh Hart, like getting a grab and go rebound, or OG Anunoby pulling an Alex Sarr and like being that like, screw it, OG's down there somewhere, chuck it to him. He gets a dunk, he gets a layup. But I know that's an area they want to emphasize. Did he inject some pace when he was in the game?
Yeah, I feel like he could slow the game down a little bit at times, which was nice to see. It was kind of refreshing because sometimes the Wizards were way too run and gun. I was like, all right, guys, we got to slow it down at some point because it's just getting ugly out there. Guys are getting gassed. The defensive intensity on the other side of the ball will really tail off when guys are pushing the pace too much all game long. And I feel like Brogdon, ultimately, if you do have him come off the bench, he's a guy that can slow the tempo for you and still really be serviceable in the role that you would have for him because, as we said, still even at his age at 32, he's pretty good at breaking down the defense. He can get to the basket for you. And I think with that being said, if you maybe operate him in the pick and roll a little bit, be some opportunities where he could play make for others, while keeping the offense at a slow relative pace for those situations where he comes off the bench.
Got it. I want to address the other end of the floor. B-ball index gave him an F grade defensively while giving him an A- offensively, despite the shooting. It's sometimes hard to tell when you are surrounded by talented but very young defenders who is making the mistake. Like Mikal Bridges, for example, graded out as the worst pick and roll defender or screen navigator in basketball last year. And he was not great, certainly by his standards, but a lot of that stat probably had to do with Karl Anthony Towns. I'm wondering how much of Malcolm Brogdon grading out extremely poorly defensively do you think was just the situation, maybe the fact that like winning was not the ultimate priority in Washington last year, and how much of it was like, this is a guy who at his peak was probably average defensively, maybe slightly above average defensively, and has just turned a corner into someone who's not a very good defender at the NBA level at this point?
I look at it from the perspective that everybody on the Wizards was bad defensively because the team was so dang bad defensively. They were bottom in the league defensively in most categories present. They didn't defend the three-point ball well. They didn't defend the rim well. They didn't do a whole lot well. Maybe the best part of their game defensively was Alex Sarr protecting the rim or Keyshawn George, who would attribute some stocks, especially later in the season. But ultimately, the team defense was terrible. They were unable to rotate well enough, was really the big problem. There'd constantly be guys way open on the outside for open looks. They wouldn't rotate well enough down low in the paint. Way too many free baskets given up by the defense. And I'd have to really go back and watch a lot of the games to assess how much of it was on Brogdon, maybe not rotating himself, or them just not communicating well enough on defense, because that's part of it too. When you have a lot of young guys on the floor, you know how important communication is on the defensive side of the basketball. And you have young guys that just aren't used to certain looks that they're going to see from NBA offenses. It makes it tough on those guys, and especially the mismatches that were probably created when you have a super young defender that just can't physically match up with a lot of the guys the Wizards had to play against last year. That ultimately is really what's going to be the downfall of the entire defense. So, well, Brogdon probably, as you said, maybe just an average defender at best, maybe at the best point of his career a couple years back when he was a sixth man of the year. But I wouldn't say really his defensive work that he put in last year is overall that concerning. I think the situation that he was in just makes it seem like, I don't know, how is anybody going to be that successful defensively?
It's going to be interesting. Is Jordan Clarkson like very similar profile coming from the Utah Jazz? I would gauge at their peaks just because Brogdon is a slightly smarter player and a little sturdier. Like he probably has the higher ceiling of the two, but that is a concern for both those guys. There are worlds where the Knicks try to play them together for stretches. Even against bench units, I wonder if that becomes a problem for New York and you need to separate them. But if Brogdon can be a little bit closer to the guy he was, I mean, if you want to go all the way back to Milwaukee, certainly in Indiana and Boston, I think that should ultimately be tenable for New York, especially like when you have Deuce McBride out there and Mitchell Robinson out there insulating bench units, one of Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, that they should be in a good enough position that they could play Brogdon a decent amount. His leadership is something I'm really curious about. I mean, had had the nickname like Prez, I think early in his career, like was like he was just renowned in his time at the University of Virginia on those teams under Tony Bennett for what he brought to the table. I believe at one point the vice president of the NBA Players Association. Was that something that was off discussed in Washington, and him being a positive influence on a really young locker room?
Yeah, I just feel like the time that he missed was a big reason why maybe he wasn't able to have an impact that the front office had hoped when they signed a guy, because that's been the biggest thing with guys they've brought in throughout this rebuilding process is they want guys that were able to really be a voice in the locker room. And when it came down to it, it turned out that Jordan Poole, who was only a 25-year-old player, became one of the veteran voices of that locker room despite his really young age. Last year at the deadline, they go out and they get Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton. Obviously, Marcus Smart gets bought out before heading to Los Angeles, and now you have Chris Middleton, who's still in the roster, ultimately could be in that role. But there's a big emphasis that the Wizards front office has put on having these key leadership guys, and I think Brogdon was supposed to be part of that plan, maybe didn't get to play enough ultimately to be as effective as a leader as they would have hoped. I feel like CJ McCollum this year is going to be what they wanted Brogdon to be, really for the most part, in terms of the way he's going to play on the floor and in terms of a locker room presence. I feel like CJ McCollum is going to kind of slot right in that role that Brogdon was in. I mean, that was kind of the ancillary move that was made right there when it was clear that Brogdon was not going to be back.
All right, Ben Strober, you can check him out on Locked On Wizards, wherever you can get podcasts. Hopefully we get to do this again, man, sometime during the season. Yeah. I also am incredibly excited to watch Trey Johnson just put up 45 on a team. Like he was cooking in Summer League. Guy is a walking bucket. I'm really interested to see what the Wizards look like this year, and I hope you have a lot of fun covering them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to happen. The 45-point game, we've talked about that a little bit. When is it going to be, that night where Trey Johnson just goes off?
We'll keep our fingers crossed.
It probably won't be that game. We'll see. I feel like it happens at some point later in the season, so we'll see how the schedule lines up. But Gavin, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
You got it, man. We'll talk to you soon on both Locked On Knicks and, of course, check out Ben over on Locked On Wizards. All right, guys, as promised, we're going to wrap up the show with my appearance on Locked On NBA Daily, telling you my thoughts and the thoughts of Haize, the host of Locked On Heat, and Wes Goldberg, the host of Locked On Bulls, Wes Goldberg, the host of Locked On Heat, on the Knicks offseason. A little debate, little pushback. It is a fun 10 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Next on Locked On Knicks. But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at 5 Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5 Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee plus B vitamins and nutrients with zero sugar and zero crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get that boost when you need it. My favorite part, I love that it kicks in almost immediately, right? I definitely am someone who gets knocked out over the course of the day. Pretty typical for someone with ADHD. Could you guys tell? The speed with which this brings my energy back up is absolutely huge. It's sugar-free, and I ultimately don't have to worry about crashing later. So enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5 Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today.
Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. The Locked On Podcast Network has a show for every team. Check out Locked On Warriors and Locked On Rockets for more from the local experts on today's top stories. The Knicks have been busy signing Landry Shamet, Malcolm Brogdon, Garrison Matthews to try out deals to fill out the roster at guard, and now they continue to work out free agent centers, the latest being Alex Len and Trey Jemison. Gavin, you're the host of Locked On Knicks. Happy to have you here because this is kind of confusing. What are the Knicks doing? Because there's not a ton of roster spots, certainly not enough roster spots to sign all of these guys. What's the plan here for the end of the roster?
All right, so the initial presumption is that one of Tyler Kolek or Pacom Donnie is going to get traded to make room so they could bring in Landry Shamet as Malcolm Brogdon. As you hinted at, they cannot keep both of those guys without making a move. Like they have to be under the second apron. Pacom Donnie opens up a lot more financial flexibility for them, where they could potentially bring in a 15th guy right after the trade deadline versus having to wait until April if Tyler Kolek is the one traded. Personally, I think it makes a lot more sense to trade Kolek because there's no real role for him on this team, given the glut of guards that they brought in. Pacom as a 6'8", potential two-way wing is just sort of an upside bet they don't currently have on the roster. And outside of OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, they don't really have a guy that you would describe as like a traditional big wing who can shoot. Obviously, Josh Hart can sort of play that role, but I think what he does is a lot more needed than what Kolek brings to the table. And then you take into account their ages. Pacom is 19. Kolek is going to turn 25 during the season. So that makes more sense. As far as the big men coming in, that's where you get to like your Windhorse, like pointy fingers, and you say, is there potentially like a bigger move looming here, despite the fact that Mitchell Robinson is awesome. It was arguably their best player at times throughout the playoffs. The Knicks front office has seemingly been trying to trade him on and off for the last 5 years, and it feels like you can never assume that he's going to be on this team long-term. And you wonder if maybe they're working a bigger deal to try to turn him into a different perimeter piece. And in turn, they're working out potential third string centers that would move up Ariel Hukporti, that would move up Gershon Yabusele in the Knicks rotation. I wouldn't bet on that, but it does have you thinking, because outside of that, there's not really a world where the Knicks will have another center on this roster. So it is a little confusing.
Yeah, I mean, watching the Knicks do these moves, it's just like, okay, what are they planning here? Like, we talked a couple of episodes ago, and I had been holding on to the thought, like, the Knicks haven't done much this offseason, but then when you look at adding Yabusele, adding Jordan Clarkson, like, these are really solid moves, and I think, that's what the Knicks are doing. They're making really solid moves. They didn't make the big splash move yet, and I think that's what these are setting up for the Knicks. I think it's the right route to go for the Knicks as well. Now, if they have a disappointing season or they don't make it far in the NBA playoffs, and of course they can make a pivot this offseason, there'll be a lot of teams that are going to be buyers on things, but it just seems like they're trying to flesh out that bench, it's never really a bad decision at all by any team to make sure you have depth, especially when you already have won over 50 games.
Is it not a little risky to trade one of your draft picks from the recent years, whether it's Kolek or Dadier, trade like a homegrown guy like Mitchell Robinson and do it to add oft injured Malcolm Brogdon, oft on a different team every other year, Landry Shamet, and journeyman center like Alex Len, or an unproven guy like Trey Jemison? Like, I understand, okay, hey, the East is open, let's go for it. Are these the guys that you are that you're going for it with to fill out the end of your bench?
So to be clear, if Mitchell Robinson was the trade, I think that would be to acquire another rotation piece, right? Whether that was a wing, whether that was like in conjunction with maybe moving a couple other pieces to bring in someone like Walker Kessler, who the Knicks had a lot of interest in last offseason before they ultimately traded for Karl-Anthony Towns. They would not trade Mitchell Robinson just to accommodate Malcolm Brogdon or Landry Shamet again. Like, I don't think it could be stated enough just like how freakishly impactful he was, to the point that Joe Mazzulla was like, that is the one guy we do not want on the floor. He scares the crap out of me. We're going to play Hakamich until you just refuse to play him anymore. So I think Mitch is in a separate conversation. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on that. Kolek is interesting because he was a guy, there's been a lot of reporting around the idea that he was someone Tom Thibodeau was really in love with and really insistent that the Knicks bring in. And he is an exceptionally talented passer of the basketball. It reminds me a little of like Kendall Marshall, if you guys remember, to North Carolina a decade ago, who was on the Phoenix Suns, where he's this extraordinarily talented passer. And the question is, will he ever be good enough defensively to stay on the floor to show it? Will he ever be a good enough scorer to draw enough attention to leverage his passing? And he's someone who had a fairly disappointing summer league, didn't shoot well, didn't look that good scoring the ball. I do think he's the type of player who will look better around NBA level talent. And he really flashed during that stretch when Jalen Brunson was hurt and the Knicks had a couple of other injuries. Like he's putting up, I think over 3 games, he had like a 22-1 assist to turnover ratio. Like, he is an exceptional decision maker, but again, he's going to turn 25 during the year. He shot like 16% from 3 last season, just has not shown any signs that he's ready to be an NBA level scorer or defender. And at his age, there's just not really an upside there. And you look at the Knicks situation in the East, right? No Jason Tatum, no Tyrese Halliburton, Jalen Brunson smack dab in the middle of his prime. Same with OG, same with Karl-Anthony Towns, same with Mikal Bridges. Like this is the year for the New York Knicks, even if it's just year 1 of the Mike Brown era. And given that, if you have someone like Malcolm Brogdon, given an injury to, let's just say Jordan Clarkson gets hurt or Deuce McBride gets hurt, there's a real world where Malcolm Brogdon can give you 18 valuable minutes in a playoff series. And we saw it with the Pacers going to Ben Shepherd. We saw with the Thunder going deep into their bench. We saw with TJ McConnell in the finals, right? Like deep bench pieces, not that that's McConnell, like can ultimately swing a series, can ultimately swing your championship window. So I think given the importance of this season, it is worth the Knicks to trade a little bit of future equity for a better shot at a championship this year.
Yeah, I mean, you got to take a shot. Like especially where the East is now, taking a shot to do whatever you feel like it's going to take for you to get a championship is the name of the game here. And the question is did they do enough? And we won't really know till the start of the season. I think that the Knicks and the Cavs are above the rest, and you have like 2 or 3 teams that are going to be slightly above the rest of the teams in the East. But anywhere between like the 5th seed, 6th seed, all the way down to the 10th seed in the East is going to be separated by like 5-6 games, or maybe 7 games. So it's going to be a fun season to watch.
Might be too early for this, considering that they might still be making some moves here, but they do have Brogdon under contract, Shamit's under contract. Maybe they add one of these veteran setters or something else shakes loose here. But Haize, you mentioned that you were warming up to the Knicks offseason. Would you give it a grade?
Yeah, it's solid. I think C+, almost B-, that I'll give it to him. I think, I expect them to do more with the coaching change than bringing in Mike Brown, but I think what they've done here, adding Jordan Clarkson, who can sneeze and get 15 points, Yabusele is going to be really good as a role player for them. Brogdon, like I like what they've done. So I think, yeah, solid C+, B-, I'll give them.
Gavin?
Yeah, you asked me this, Wes, when we did Locked On NBA Game Night, and I was at a B+. I think I moved up to an A-. I love finding a way to get both Brogdon and Shamit on this roster. Like I think last year the Knicks' depth was just a question all throughout the season, and now 6 through 11, like that group of Mitchell Robinson, or if you start him, Josh Hart in that place, like that's as good of a 6th man as any team in the NBA has. Deuce McBride in that next spot. The Knicks are consistently just dramatically better when he's on the floor. Jordan Clarkson, a perennial 6th man of the year candidate. Gershon Yabusele, right, a guy who gives you legitimate above the break 3-point shooting, is a transition threat, can hold his own defensively. I think he was a fantastic ad. They get him to take a little bit less money than he could to get both Brogdon, who like for his career, 40+% 3-point shooter, still an elite an elite playmaker at this point in his career. And that was something the Knicks really needed. And they get that off the bench in him and Clarkson. Shamit, who was heroic for them in that Pacers series last year. Like I would put the 6 through 11 for the Knicks up there with any team, maybe short of the Thunder, Clippers, Wolves, or maybe the 3 teams I'd have ahead of them. But I think the Knicks have one of the most talented starting 5s in basketball, and a 6 through 11 you'd put up with anyone. I'm with you that I was a little lukewarm initially on Mike Brown. I do think he allows you to retain a lot of what made Tom Thibodeau great, with maybe a little bit of a higher ceiling in terms of his schematic versatility defensively. I think he's going to be more creative offensively. These moves clearly signal that he's willing to play 10 guys, and we will not get Josh Hart 47 minutes a game in January again. That would be fantastic. So I'm going A-. I'm really, really excited about what the Knicks did this offseason. Only way it could have been a lot higher for me is if they somehow swung a Giannis deal, which never really seemed like it was in the cards.
It wasn't a loud offseason, to Haize's point earlier, right? It didn't grab a bunch of headlines and stuff like that, but you get Gershon Yabusele and Jordan Clarkson, 2 proven rotation pieces for bargain contracts, and you didn't have to give up anything to get those things, to get those guys. We call that good business in the NBA. That's just good business. If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Locked On NBA wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. Thanks to Gavin and Haize for their expertise today. Thank you for making Locked On NBA Daily your first listen. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NBA.